Josh here, and this is my review of Rambo Extended Cut. A little delayed, I think I'm a week late on the release for this, but I haven't found time till now. So, I watched this movie just last night, it's still very fresh in my memory, and I watched the more recent Rambo, the fourth one that is, theatrical cut fairly recently as well, so I think I'm in a good position to make a lot of comparisons between this. Unfortunately, I must say that I think the extended cut does not hold up as well as the theatrical cut. There is a lot of little differences. Even though the extended cut is only about 8 minutes longer than the theatrical, it does change a lot of existing events. It rejiggers a lot of things, so things happen before other times. There's an extended intro, more flashbacks, and a lot of these things you think would improve the film, but in fact actually kind of hinder it. I was mildly bored while watching the movie, and that's saying something, because I really, really love the fourth Rambo movie. That said, this review will contain spoilers for Rambo and especially the extended cut, so if you don't want to hear them, or if you want to hear my thoughts on that film as a whole, I'd suggest go watching my Rambo-thon Part 4, in which I review Rambo, the fourth one that is. So, the changes that I did like, let's start out with those, because I feel, because of my love for the Rambo series, I might as well. First of all, there is an extended monologue when Sarah goes to Rambo in the rain asking him for help, in which he details quite a bit of his his inner feelings towards the conflict. Not only of himself, but just kind of the conflict that he's been going through where the government mistreats people, and his just whole dehumanization process via war. And it's actually a really great monologue. Unfortunately, to right go alongside that, the scene where he is sharpening his machete now does not have that monologue where Rambo says, "Killing's as easy as breathing." No, it actually has a prayer from the pastor that comes to visit him, which seems really preachy and terrible, and while the monologue could be seen as really preachy, I actually thought it worked quite well, but seeing as it gets rid and ruins that other scene, which is frankly more effective in the first place, I don't know what to say, really. I do want to mention that there is a lot of added characterization towards the Julie Benz or Sarah character. There's another scene added where where he's first taking the missionaries upriver, where she explains to him her job back home, kind of about her relationship with, I can't remember that dude's name, I just seen it last night. The other male pastor, the main character, didn't really like him. They've actually humanized him quite a bit too, and taken out a few kind of humorous bits with him, and I thought that kind of made the movie drag a little more. It is nice that they brought back Rambo's combat knife, though. They've randomly added in a scene when he's burning the pirate's boat where he throws his knife there, too. And that was kind of cute, you know, a nice throwback. And I will say, too, that scene, despite being greatly changed, I'll go into that more in a second, was a lot more vicious. You really felt that Rambo was just pissed. He knifed the gas tanks to try and spread the gas. He's just throwing things around at random. And just in general, I want to say that I think there is a lot more anger in this movie than there was in the initial cut. In the theatrical cut of Rambo, he was more of kind of a silent giant, where he's clearly boiling under the surface, hating these things, but doesn't manifest them in an extremely angry way. And it's more of a passive-aggressive type thing. It doesn't really show itself until the end of the movie when, well, let's face it, the entire movie goes berserk and just starts killing everyone. But throughout the movie, this is a lot more evident, and that is more a matter of opinion, I think, whether you like it or not. I actually preferred the evolution of the character where he becomes kind of a slow giant, rather than kind of this mean Yeti-like character, just kind of walking around, and I realize I'm kind of using these weird terms for this, but I think you get what I mean. There's a lot more dialogue by Rambo this time, and a lot of it is not necessarily even really snarky, but really just mean to a lot of the characters, and just comes off as not really that likable of a guy, frankly, and understandably considering the issues he's gone through, of course, but it really didn't add anything to the movie, I thought. And speaking of something that didn't really add to the movie, there is more flashback scenes when he's burning the pirate's boat, rather than just the initial one, and he's sleeping right before the scene where Sarah meets him in the rain. And these added flashback scenes are really just kind of repetitive, and I didn't think that the actual color scheme for them was very good. For some reason, they seemed oddly bleached, like a bleached gray, which didn't really mesh with the other one, which is more of a deep bluish gray hue. But at any rate, not nitpicking here, but I think that those flashbacks are just really repetitive. It shows a couple of them where he's killing the pirates, and he's killing the pirates from that boat, shows that scene from earlier, and it just doesn't seem necessary. Again, it flows it makes sense with the increased level of anger in the movie, but it just seems repetitive because that one flashback on the boat really just was so effective in the first place. I didn't think it really needed to be repeated. And that's saying something because, like I said, I really enjoyed that initial flashback. A couple things I did like about this theatrical or this extended cut, though, and I realize again I'm being terribly negative here, and I don't want to make sure that I don't want to make it seem like this is a bad movie now, but the extended cut really isn't as good as the theatrical cut. But like I said, one thing I did like about this new cut was the fact that there was a lot more of Rambo's just everyday life going about at the beginning there. They have more snake play at the beginning, which I thought was quite interesting, and a whole little few couple more snippets of him living around in Thailand there. And that was all. That was very nice. I thought that could have worked nicely into the theatrical cut, but again, I think one of the main strengths of the theatrical cut was its editing, and just like the flashback, it's somewhat unnecessary. One thing I do actually have a really huge problem with is the fact that they have changed around the opening scenes. Instead of opening with Tint going and trying to kill all of the Karen rebels through this kind of minefield and rice paddy field, it's that is now not the beginning. It used to start out with that right after the newsreel, but now it shows Rambo's almost entire opening scenes before it even gets to this. And this actually has a double effect, or two effects here. One is positive, one is negative. The negative is that it slows down the movie significantly because there is no action for a good portion of the opening sequence. And while I realize this seems kind of hypocritical considering I praised Part 3 for not having a whole lot of action, and First Blood itself, which I liked the most of the series, really didn't have a whole lot of action at the start, for some reason it just it slowed the movie down to a crawl here. And I'm not terribly sure why. I think that combined with the extended scenes where it shows more of Rambo's daily life just didn't lend itself well to this type of action movie. On the other hand, this does have a much more pointed effect on the actual villain of the film, on Tint, because it actually gives him it lends the audience more to thinking of him as a villain. And there's actually a couple things that the movie do this, and one of them is this rejiggering of the scenes, because by this time you've been introduced to Rambo, good guy, and as well, now that you know the situation, you're a little more familiar with it, rather than just throwing it right at you, it seems more like he is the bad guy of the movie. I stressed in my initial Rambothon views that sometimes Rambo movies have a little difficulty actually kind of trying to draw a villain of any kind, and not since Teasel has there really been a very good one. Well, Rambo 3 tried, even if it was very cliche and silly. But this actually does help quite a bit. There's also an added scene where they bring up the drug trafficking trade by the Burmese army here, and really kind of alludes to the fact that this guy is not only a pedophile and a murderer, but also an addict. And as well, there is a couple different pairing scenes where Rambo is sharpening his knife, and it immediately cuts to Tint, kind of paralleling the two, which I thought was kind of funny, actually, if you've seen the initial cut. But overall, it really does feel like there was an added draw to the main antagonist of the story, and that was much appreciated. It makes the conclusion actually much better. And speaking of the conclusion, there is an added scene right before Rambo goes home, where he's kind of waving to Sarah and listening to the, what can I say, the making of production diary on the Blu-ray disc here. It is actually kind of interesting. He said that Julie Benz represents the innocence that Rambo is finally leaving behind in the path to accepting himself, and that makes a whole lot of sense. So I almost wish they had added that in before. At the same time, did I kind of get that from the theatrical cut now that I know that? Yeah, you know what, I kind of did. In conclusion, the extended cut is not as good as the theatrical cut, if only because the theatrical cut gives you all the bare essentials of all of what you need to understand the story, all with really, really tight editing, even if it is kind of very odd film that is based around its climax. One thing I did want to mention before this review ends, though, is that the Blu-ray, even if you don't really love the extended cut, is definitely worth getting because there's an amazing production diary. It's about an hour and a half long. That's kind of a mix between fly on the wall footage, behind the scenes footage, bloopers, director's commentary. Absolutely great. And considering in Canada this is only $12.99 for the Blu-ray, it has pretty much the same specs as the initial one. This is definitely worth checking out. The only other qualm I have is that the Blu-ray sound mixing for some of the new scenes isn't exactly up to par. Video is certainly, though. You can't really notice the seamless transition unless you've seen the other one recently. Otherwise, if you're going to pick up the extended cut, you're going to need to be a fan, really. But I think it's worth checking out, if only for the Rambo diehards. Otherwise, stick to the theatrical cut.